I hid them the diary of Corporal Karl Hoffmann, 53rd Infantry Regiment, 2nd Company, Eastern Front. Before I write anything else, I want to say this: I don't know if anyone will ever read these pages. I don't know if I'll make it back. But if someone finds this diary and I'm not around to explain myself, read it anyway. Read all of it. Then decide what kind of man I was. My name is Karl Hoffmann. Corporal, 53rd Infantry Regiment, 2nd Company. I'm from Schwabing, a quiet neighborhood in Munich where the tramway runs past your window every morning and wakes you before your alarm does. Before the war I worked in a bakery. I was good at it. I liked the simplicity of it: flour, water, heat, time. Things that didn't lie to you. I started keeping this diary because I was afraid. Not of dying. Of disappearing while still alive. Of waking up one morning and not recognizing the man inside my own skin. Writing keeps me tethered. It forces me to think. Thinking forces me to feel. And feeling, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, reminds me that I'm still here. November 7, 1944. We entered the town at dawn. I won't write the name, it doesn't matter. It looks like all the others. Cobblestone streets, low wooden rooftops, a small square with a half-collapsed church at its corner. Smoke still rising from some of the chimneys when we arrived, which means people were still inside. Either they didn't run, or they couldn't. The orders were standard. Systematic sweep. Every street, every building. The area would be secured. I've learned what that word means out here. It took me a while, but I've learned. My group moved along the eastern side of town. Most of the houses were empty, doors hanging open, tables still set, food left mid-meal. In one kitchen I saw a bowl of soup gone cold with the spoon still resting inside it. Someone had been sitting there, eating, and then simply stood up and left. That spoon stayed with me all morning. In another house, children's toys scattered across the floor. A wooden horse. A cloth doll with yarn hair. A small rubber ball. A mother had left this place so suddenly she couldn't take her child's doll. I stood there looking at those toys longer than I should have. At the end of the street, one house was different from the others. Smaller, its garden wall partially crumbled, its windows cracked. But the front door was closed. Not locked, just closed. That small difference caught my eye. I went in. The ground floor was empty. One room, a small kitchen, stone floor. On the wall hung a family photograph: mother, father, 2 children, photographed on a sunny day with everyone smiling. The father had his hand on the mother's shoulder. The older child was holding the younger one. An ordinary family photograph. The kind you find in every home. But that family was no longer here. I climbed the stairs. The wooden steps creaked. 2 rooms upstairs. The first was empty, bed overturned, wardrobe open and bare. The second door was half ajar. No sound came from inside. I pushed it open. And stopped. 2 children. Pressed into the right corner of the room, wedged behind a toppled wardrobe. The older one was a girl 10 years old, maybe slightly more. Her hair was tangled, her face pale. deep bruise-colored rings beneath her eyes. She hadn't slept in days. The younger one was a boy, 6 or 7. He was folded inside his sister's arms, his head buried against her chest. The girl was looking at me. I don't know how to describe that look. Fear, yes, but something beyond fear. A hardness. A refusal. Her whole body was saying something without a single word. Whatever you're going to do, you don't touch him. My stomach dropped so fast I nearly bent forward. My fingers went cold around the rifle. I felt them numb, distant, as if they belonged to someone else. The trigger was there. My hand knew where it was. And that knowing, that automatic, trained knowing, terrified me more than anything else in that room. I didn't move. A second passed. 5 seconds. Maybe a minute. Time stops working correctly in moments like that. Then voices from below. My unit, moving closer. Something happened inside me. Not a decision exactly, decisions take time. This was faster than thought. I turned. Walked to the door. Stood at the threshold and called down, "Here is Niemand." Empty, move on. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I waited. The footsteps continued, then faded. I turned back to the children. The girl hadn't moved. Still holding her brother, still watching me. I brought my finger to my lips. Quiet. She understood. A slow, careful nod. I left. November 9th, 1944. I went back at night. I'd set aside part of my bread ration and a piece of hard cheese I'd been saving. I walked in the dark, keeping close to the walls, and let myself quietly into the house. I left the food inside the door and slipped out. In the morning, passing by on patrol, I glanced at the window. Something about the stillness of the house told me what I needed to know. They'd eaten it. Second night, I brought more. A tin of something from a supply crate. I didn't examine what it said on the label. I left it and left. Third night, when I opened the door, the girl was there. She'd come downstairs. She stood in the dark and watched me approach. She tensed when she saw me. I stopped. Crouched slowly. Set the food on the floor. Stood back up. Gave one deliberate nod. She stepped forward and took it. Then she looked up at me. That same face, but something in it had shifted. The stone hadn't gone. But there was a hairline crack in it. The beginning of something. I wrote in my diary that night, third time. She was waiting. Something in her face has changed. I don't know why I keep going back. That's not true, I do know. I go back because not going back is no longer something I'm capable of. I don't know when that happened. November 11th, 1944. We tried to talk tonight. Talk isn't the right word, we have no shared language. But we communicated. She pointed to herself, Marta. She pointed to her brother, Thomas. I pointed to myself, Karl. Something happened when she said those names. They became real in a different way. Not two anonymous children hiding in a room, Marta and Thomas. This distinction seems small. It isn't. I asked about their parents with gestures, with my eyes. Marta was quiet for a long moment. Then she shook her head. Slowly. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She'd already done whatever crying she had left. I didn't ask about their father. I couldn't bring myself to frame the question. That night I lay awake a long time thinking about the way she shook her head. Such a small motion. Such an enormous meaning. November 13th, 1944. Today I heard something that turned my blood cold. Lieutenant Richter announced a second systematic sweep. An informant had suggested there might be concealed civilians in the eastern quarter. Every building would be re-examined more carefully this time. I stood there listening and felt my stomach go hollow. My hands, hanging at my sides, started to tremble slightly. I pressed them flat against my thighs and kept my face still. Richter was watching his men when he spoke. He had a way of doing that, scanning faces while he talked, reading reactions. I gave him nothing. But inside I was already calculating. The house. The second floor. The toppled wardrobe. If Richter went in himself, he would not stop at the door the way I had. That evening I went early. I had to warn them. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard boots on the cobblestones outside. Heavy, deliberate Richter's walk. I recognized it. I froze. Through the cracked window I watched him stop in the street below. He looked up at the house. My chest tightened to the point that I couldn't draw a full breath. He stood there for what felt like an entire minute, one hand resting on his belt, head slightly tilted. From somewhere above me not a sound. Marta had heard him too. I could feel it. The whole house had gone still in a way that felt intentional. Thomas wasn't coughing. Nothing moved. Richter looked at the house a moment longer. Then he turned and walked on. I stood on that staircase without moving until his footsteps were completely gone. Then I exhaled. My legs felt wrong, loose at the joints, unreliable. I sat down on the step and put my face in my hands and stayed there until the shaking passed. When I finally reached the top, Marta was already pressed against the wall beside the door. She'd known. She'd heard everything and she hadn't made a sound, and she'd kept Thomas quiet beside her. I looked at her. She looked at me. We didn't need language for what passed between us in that moment. November 15th, 1944. Thomas held my hand tonight. I'd brought bread and sat with them for a while in the dark. He was half asleep against Marta's side. Then, without looking up, without saying anything, he reached over and wrapped his small fingers around two of mine. Just held on. I went completely still. His hand was cold. It was so small. And it held on with a kind of unconscious trust that I didn't deserve and couldn't explain and couldn't refuse. I have not cried since the early months of this war. Crying stops being available to you after a while. You learn to root around it, to keep moving, to function. But sitting there in that dark room with that child's hand around my fingers, something broke open. I didn't cry. But something broke open. I wrote afterward, Thomas held my hand. He didn't think about it. He just did it. He looked at me, a man in this uniform, in this town, here for the reasons I'm here, and he held my hand. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if I'm allowed to let it mean what it means to me. November 18, 1944. The unit is staying longer. I'd hoped we'd move on by now. We aren't. Tom's cough is getting worse. I can hear it through the floor when I'm below. He's cold and he's been in that room too long, and a child that age in these conditions, I don't let myself finish that thought. They have to leave. That's become clear. Every additional day is additional risk, not just from another sweep but from everything: cold, illness, someone in the unit saying something to someone. I know a route. West of town, about 4 kilometers, there's a forest. Beyond the forest, a road. I'd heard from men I half trust that the road connects to a Soviet-controlled corridor where civilian movement is possible. I don't know if it's true, but it's the only thing I have. I drew a map on a scrap of paper. The town. The edge. The field. The tree line. The road. Arrows. I sat down with Marta and laid it flat between us and pointed. You, here, this way, go. She studied it for a long time. Longer than I expected. She traced the route with her finger once, twice. Then looked up at me. There was a question in her eyes. And underneath the question, an answer she'd already arrived at. She nodded. November 20th, 1944. I moved them out before dawn. My patrol didn't cover the western edge that morning. I had made sure of that 2 days before, quietly, without making it obvious. We moved in the dark, the three of us, close to walls, through back alleys, not a word spoken. Tomás didn't cough. Not once. I think he understood, in whatever way a child that age understands, that the silence mattered. At the last house on the western edge, I stopped. Beyond it, open field, then the dark line of the forest. I couldn't go further. The field was exposed and my being out there served no purpose that could be explained. I crouched down to Tomás's level. He looked at me with those large dark eyes. Solemn. Older than 6 years should look. I wanted to say something he could carry, something that would matter. But I had no language. He had no German. I had no Polish. I held out my hand. He looked at it. Then he put his small hand in mine and we shook hands, formally, seriously, the way men do when something is settled between them. Then I stood and faced Marta. She reached into her coat and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. She held my gaze as she did it. Then she spoke low, deliberate, looking directly at me. 4 or 5 words. Soft but clear. I didn't understand them. I folded the paper and put it in my breast pocket without looking at it. Then I stepped back. They turned. They walked into the field, toward the trees. I watched until the dark swallowed them, first Tomás, then Marta's outline, then nothing. I stood there alone at the edge of that town for a long time before I turned around. November 20th, 1944 late. They're gone. I don't know if they made it through the forest. I don't know if they found the road. I don't know if Tomás is warm. I may never know any of it. What I know is this: for 11 days I went back to that house. Every night. And every night, in those few minutes in that dark room, I was someone I recognized. The man who woke up before dawn and made bread and watched the tramway go past his window. That man. Maybe I survive this. Maybe I don't. But those 11 nights are mine. No one can take them back. Marta. Thomas. Wherever you are. The war ended. I came home. I looked for them. I wrote letters to relief organizations, to church registries, to anyone I thought might have records. Nothing came back. The chaos of those final years swallowed whole populations. I understood that. I kept looking anyway. The piece of paper stayed in my breast pocket through the rest of the war, through demobilization, through the long train ride back to Munich. I had it translated twice by people who claimed to know Polish but gave me different answers. I stopped trusting the answers. Years passed. I was riding the tramway one afternoon in 1951, the same line that ran past my childhood window, the same route I'd ridden 1,000 times before the war. An elderly woman sat down beside me. She was perhaps 70, heavy wool coat, a canvas bag on her lap, looking out the window at nothing in particular. At some point she glanced at me, then at my coat pocket, where the corner of the folded paper was visible. I'd carried it so long I no longer thought about it. She went still. I noticed and looked at her. She was staring at the paper. "May I?" she said, in careful, accented German. I took it out and handed it to her. She unfolded it with both hands, slowly, as if she already knew it might be fragile. She looked at the drawing first, 2 small figures and a larger one, the taller figure's hand resting on the children's shoulders. Then she looked at the words written below. Her face changed. "Where did you get this?" she said. I told her. As much as I could, as plainly as I could. She listened without interrupting. When I finished she was quiet for a moment, then she looked back down at the paper. "This handwriting," she said, very quietly. "This is how children wrote in our town. In our school." She paused. "I am from that region. I left in 1939. She read me the words then. 4 of them. A good person. She handed the paper back and looked at the window again. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the ride. When she stood to leave, she paused in the aisle. She didn't look back at me. But she said, in a voice just loud enough, "I hope they found the road." Then she was gone. I sat with the paper in my hands while the tramway moved on through Munich. Outside the window the city looked the way it always looked in autumn: gray sky, falling leaves, people walking with their collars up against the cold. 4 words. I have held on to much worse things for much longer. These I don't mind carrying.